Welcome back to our Wednesday night Bible study. You've come to our last installment on our study of Joseph. It's our 12th installment. I'm calling this Family Reunion. This is going to cover Genesis chapter 46 all the way to 50. We're going to take pieces of it. So last time we finished chapter 45, where Joseph revealed who he was to his brothers. And it was quite a reunion. Brothers left with abundance and told to come back to weather the famine. They told their father Jacob all that had transpired, including that Joseph was alive, and we ended the chapter with Jacob ready to go see his long-lost son. And that was this Genesis 45, verse 28. And Israel said, I'm convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So I plan to end the story of Joseph today, so we won't read Genesis verse by verse. There's a lot of text here. Let me tell you that the first 27 verses of chapter 46, which we're getting to, tells how Jacob took his sons, his wives, his children, livestock, everything they owned, leaving their home in Canaan for Egypt. So let's pick up the story in verse 28 of chapter 46. Now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel, or Jacob. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. So here was Joseph waiting for this glorious day, the reuniting with his father. Would his father still be alive when his brothers got back home? Would the stubborn old man believe them and return with them? Finally, Joseph's scouts see them on the horizon. Joseph doesn't just give directions. He jumps into his own chariot and went out to meet his father. What a reunion. He threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Literally, he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Jacob once again held the son that he had given up for dead. Joseph held his father he feared he would never see again. Quite a nice reunion there, father and son. And then verse 46:30, chapter 46:30, Israel said to Joseph, Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive. An even stronger translation would be, Now let me die, since I have seen your face. So the rest of chapter 46 tells how Joseph went to Pharaoh to tell of his family's arrival. And then the first part of chapter 47, you can read how some of Joseph's brothers, 5 of them, meet Pharaoh, and then Jacob meets Pharaoh. So let's jump to verse 11 of chapter 47. Hopefully you're following along with me. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their children. So here's Joseph settling his family in the choicest part of the land of Egypt. It was in an area located in the fertile Nile Delta, good land for grazing, and it was okayed or ordered by the Pharaoh himself. We read that Joseph was generous in making sure they had the food they needed. Now I'm going to skip 13 through 26. Let me just describe that. This is more of an explanation of what Joseph was doing for Egypt. He proved to be a wise administrator in the land of Egypt. Under his authority, the people were saved from starvation and Pharaoh prospered. Joseph showed integrity. He didn't benefit personally. Because of the man Joseph was, the people believed in him. They listened to him. They accepted his plan, and they sacrificed and worked hard, and they were grateful. In verse 25, it says, You have saved our lives, they said. Now I want to pick up on verse 27 of chapter 47. Now the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, and the years of his life were 147. Wow, 147. So God blessed his people according to the promises he made to Abraham. They were fast becoming a great nation. Before Jacob dies, you can read in chapters 48 and 49 how he blesses Joseph's two sons in chapter 48, and then Jacob's sons in chapter 49. He also gives instructions to his sons. He wants to be buried back home in Canaan, where he came from. So let's read the last verse of chapter 49, verse 33, and then the first verse of the next chapter. When Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Then the next chapter, Joseph threw himself upon his father and wept over him and kissed him. From there, then the next verses in chapter 50 describe how the Egyptians mourned for Jacob for 70 days. Not because they were close to Jacob, but because they were close to Joseph. Then Joseph, his household, his brothers, and all the dignitaries of Egypt too went. Took Jacob's body to Canaan to be buried with Abraham and Sarah, his grandfather and grandmother, his father Isaac and mother Rebekah, just as Jacob had commanded them. Joseph and his brothers and all who had gone with them returned to Egypt. And then we pick up in Joseph's brothers, they're having a serious concern we read about in chapter 50, verse 15. Let's look at that. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So I think we've all probably run across this in its human nature. We've all heard of long-lasting grudges people have, and the other shoe finally drops. I can see why this might be a legitimate concern for their brothers now that Jacob was gone. Joseph's seeming lack of a vengeful bone in his body might be too good to be true, they might be thinking. So what do they do? In 16, so they sent word to Joseph, saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died." So evidently the brothers had gone to Jacob before he died and had expressed their fears regarding what would happen to them. I wonder if they came clean with their father about what they had done so long ago. So here's the instructions. "This is what you are to say to Joseph." This is coming from Jacob. "I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." So from the grave, Jacob is asking Joseph to forgive his brothers. And how does Joseph react to this? When their message came to him, Joseph wept. You probably noticed Joseph is moved often when dealing with his brothers. On many occasions he's wept. My opinion is this time he is hurt by what he read from Jacob. Forgiveness has been a central part of his dealing with his brothers from the get-go. He's demonstrated gracious forgiveness. To find that they were still harboring fears of retribution after his forgiving actions and words over the years, that had to be hurtful. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. Once again, that dream so long ago by that 17-year-old Joseph comes true. But in verse 19, "But Joseph said to them, 'Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children.' And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them." Well, here's the good brother Joseph twice saying he don't be afraid. He says he'll provide for them and reassures them. I want to focus on Joseph's words in verse 20. But let's first finish Joseph's story. We'll go back to that, verse 20. I want to look at one last item about Joseph in chapter 50, verse 22. Continuing on, Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all his father's family. He lived 110 years and saw the third generation of Ephraim's children. Ephraim was the younger of his two boys. Also the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, and he was Joseph's firstborn, Manasseh. They were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. So it looks like he was a 110-year-old great-great-grandfather when he died. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So Joseph knew he was about to die. He brings up two things. The second thing was a request that his bones not remain in Egypt forever. The first was to reassure his family, his brothers, that Joseph had not forgotten God's promises to the people of Israel. Like his father Jacob, he didn't want his family to forget. So he said, God will continue to care for you, the people of Israel. He'll someday take you back to the land of your forefathers, the land of Canaan, the promised land. We know how that story ends up. That's back much later in Moses' day, going back to the promised land. And then, so Joseph died at the age of 110. And after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So Joseph was buried in Egypt. Did that become his final resting place, or did anyone honor his wishes? Well, we read in Exodus chapter 13, none other than Moses. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear an oath. And also in the book of Joshua, and Joshua's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem, in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. So, his wishes were met. His final resting place was where he started his life. And that ends his story. But I'd like to end our study, or looking at the life of Joseph, with a statement he made to his brothers. I warned you about in verse 20. Remember that. When he said, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. That's the New International Version. I put up in a couple others, New American Standard. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Or in the New Living Translation, God turned into good what you meant for evil. I believe this is an important attitude or way of thinking about life's circumstances. One that Joseph was able to reflect on from the past, which is often so much easier to do, to look back on that as he's doing here, to see God having had worked in his life. But also I think Joseph lived in the present with this thinking, this attitude as he faced troubles. Throughout his life, he seemed to grasp that God has a plan and that God had a purpose for him in his plan. Joseph was willing and ready to be used by God through the good times and the bad. So how does this relate to us? Do you find yourself in a pit? Not necessarily literally, but figuratively, yourself in a pit, feeling abandoned. Perhaps a wrong has been done to you, or you've been falsely accused, or you find yourself in some sort of prison, perhaps by the hand of others. It's natural to despair, to become bitter, to seek vengeance if others are involved, or, like Joseph, make the best of it and remember God's in control. Or good things might happen to you. A promotion, being favored, being recognized for some talent or skill. You can look at it as all on your own doing, or like Joseph, be thankful and remember God's in control. So with these thoughts at the very end here, in the good and bad, you can, like Joseph, see it all as part of God's plan for good. So I'd like to end with a short prayer for all of us, that we could have an attitude, a mindset, like Joseph did throughout all his circumstances. I ask this, O Lord, in your name. Amen. Well, thanks for sticking it out with me. Take care. Continue to be safe. And as always, may the Lord be with you.